Hello, I'm Stuart Barker, the ISO 27001 Ninja, and in today's tutorial we're going to take an exciting look at ISO 27001 Annex A 5.3 Segregation of Duties. I'm going to go through it, give you the tools, the techniques, even some templates so that you can get maximum success when it comes to your ISO 27001 certification. Now, as always, we're going to start off with a definition. What is it that the actual Annex A control is looking for? Once we understand that, it's going to be a hell of a lot easier for us to be able to satisfy it and to implement it. So let's start off with a definition. Okay, ISO 27001 Annex A 5.3 Segregation of Duties. Conflicting duties and conflicting areas of responsibility should be segregated. Okay, high level, what are we looking at here? We're looking at removing that conflict that can occur within our environments, within our roles, between people that approve things and then once they've approved it, they action it. I mean, that's in its basic terms, right? You know, if we have a change and we request a change, or we have an approval, we request an approval and then we action something, then there's obviously a conflict of interest. In the real world, the example that we give is when people submit their expenses. If the same person submits their business expenses, and if the same person then approves those expenses, and the same person then pays those expenses, then clearly there is a conflict of interest. Now, there are clearly situations where this may have to happen. And I'm not going to argue with that. I'm going to show you how you can get around that. But for now, the concept, the principle of segregating out conflicts with our environment is primarily what we're looking at here. We're going to do that for the information security management system, and we're going to do that within the controls that we've got. So how are we going to do that? The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to have to identify where those conflicts can exist. Here we're going to look at the control and the clauses that we've looked at previously on allocating roles and responsibilities. You remember when we went through the tutorial on roles and responsibilities, we talked about defining them. So what roles is it that we need? And we talked about documenting what their responsibilities were. And then we talked about allocating people to that. It shouldn't necessarily be the case that with the standard definition of roles that there are inherent and inbuilt conflicts, but that's a great place to start. So we're going to go through and we're going to identify what those conflicts could be within our organization. And if we have them, we're going to document them. Then what we're going to do is we're going to remove those conflicts. So here what we're looking at is how can we remove conflict? How can we segregate out duties within our environment? In an organization with many people, this is easy and this is straightforward. It is more difficult. It is more difficult in an organization of 1, 2, 5, 10 people, and I understand that. So let's assume that there is no segregation of duty, no conflict of duty issues within your organization because you're large enough. So what you're going to say is, well, we've documented our roles and responsibilities and we haven't identified any conflicts and everything is hunky-dory. For the smaller organization, what are you going to do? I recommend for the smaller organization that we can either outscope the control, right? We can outscope the control, and the reason for outscoping the control is that we're too small. Right? We're too small and it doesn't necessarily represent a risk for us, and therefore we are not going to implement this particular control. If we do that, belts and braces, clearly what we're going to do is we're going to have a risk register item. We're going to put that onto our risk register. We're going to manage that through risk management. We're going to be able to evidence that we accepted that risk, be that through the management review meetings where it was discussed and approved, or whatever approval mechanism that you have. But that is one way that we can do it. We can actually accept the risk of conflicting duties within our organization. We can outscope that particular control, and our justification is that we're just too small. So that was a sidebar. We're going to work on the assumption that segregation of duty in its normal course isn't an issue for you, but look at areas where actually it could be. So you're assuming everything's okay. Where could it be? One of the biggest ones that we come across when it comes to the ISO 27001 standard is about internal audits. Now, organizations, businesses, companies that do their own internal audit, this is the biggest area of a conflict of duty when they use their own internal staff. We looked at other tutorials on conducting internal audit, And we've referenced time and time again in other controls, this control about segregation of duty, removal of conflict. You can imagine a scenario where if you choose somebody to do the internal audit who is actually responsible for the operation of the area, then you're going to have a conflict. Now, as the example I've given you before, it is technically possible that you can manage that through risk management, but I wouldn't encourage you to do so. What I would say is, in that particular scenario, if you are going to do it yourself, and I highly recommend that you don't, that you bring in independent third party, or that you're big enough and you can bring in an independent department. But if you are going to do it yourself, then try and put in place compensating controls. Compensating controls are controls such as having more than one person do the internal audit and ensuring that you're not doing an internal audit of the area for which you are responsible or for the area of which you are operating that is part of your day-to-day. Let me give you another example. Let's go deeper. If I'm the information security manager and the information security officer and I am implementing ISO 27001, I'm implementing the information security management system, I'm running the information security management system, it should not be the case that I am then doing the internal audit of the information security management system. What you'll often find with a consultant or a consultancy business is that they'll bring in a colleague to do that work, or it will be you that's operating it and they are operating a purely audit function for you. But you need to segregate out the duty. This is one that the ISO 27001 auditors pick up on regularly. So that's the prime area where we see these things, where we see conflicts of interest coming in. Obviously, there are maybe other areas. These are purely, you're getting the feel from me, these are size-based issues, right? Tech startups, early stage businesses, when you're implementing roles, when you're implementing processes, speed, efficiency, time to market, profitability are drivers for you, and oftentimes things like conflict of interest, segregation of duty isn't something that you consider. So let me give you an example. Where you have a development team and it's a small development team, but the development team has access to dev, test and production, they are also the tech support. There is a potential conflict, clearly conflict there. There is a conflict there. Now, there are compensating controls that you can consider there. Having different accounts to perform different roles, and we'll come on to that when we look at things like monitoring and logging. So that's another one that we see. It's a size-based issue, really, segregation of duty, but you're going to go through, identify your roles, identify where there are areas of conflict. Either you're going to address those areas of conflict directly or through compensating control, or you're going to accept the risk of having that conflict. You're going to put it on your risk register, manage it through risk management and accept that risk. So segregation of duty isn't particularly hard. It just gets harder the smaller you are. But again, there are ways around that. Top 3 mistakes that we see in this particular area is you don't have enough staff to segregate the duties. So again, I'm just giving you some coping mechanisms for that. Another one is that people haven't done what they should do. If you do put in a compensating control, oftentimes we see people don't follow it. So they're just using one account and logging into everything if that's the route that you've gone. And other mistakes that we see are, your documentation and version control is wrong. You've documented the wrong roles, or you've documented roles but you haven't updated them within the last 12 months. Or you haven't truly identified what the conflicts are, or you've allocated people to roles that have left the organization. So a couple of mess ups that we see, or mistakes that we see within there. But that is ISO 27001, Annex A 5.3 segregation of duty. There's a more detailed blog, right? There's a detailed blog. I'm putting the link below that goes along with this. Be sure to reach out and have a look at that blog if you want a little bit more detail on it. But for today, my name is Stuart Barker. I am the ISO 27001 Ninja. That was ISO 27001 Annex A 5.3 segregation of duty. And until the next tutorial video, peace out.